Nice. All right. So as I was saying, I hope this lecture session isn't just me talking for like the next 30 minutes or so. I do hope that it can be interactive, and I think that's the best way for you to get introduced to the concept of building cases. Even at the highest level, more or less the things that we do are like more or less exactly the same. We just do it faster and we go a bit further in the sort of clash analysis and the arguments that we do run. So I do hope that y'all be willing to participate. If you have any questions, at any point, feel free to drop it in the chat or just unmute yourself and let me know. I'll just ask a question and I'll try to address it when I can. Okay, so in terms of case construction, broadly speaking, there are similarities and differences across different motions, but in most debates that you will get, and most motions at this tournament as well, there will be a relatively straightforward clash. So the motion we're going to look at today is a motion that I set as part of a previous tournament that happened last weekend, and involves a relatively straightforward clash of cultural assimilation against seclusion. So again, there's a few things that happen across the board in every single motion and every single debate that you do debate in. The difference is probably just the context and the arguments that you eventually end up running. Also, one other thing I sort of want to flag out here is that this workshop is going to focus more on the macro aspects of case construction, because there'll be another workshop on argumentation and how to build and structure arguments specifically. So I don't want to go into that aspect of case development that much, just so there isn't that much of an overlap. So I do encourage you to come for the workshop on argumentation. I believe it's going to be happening on Thursday. Again, argument building and case construction, more or less, they have some overlap. And when you are prepping a motion, given that the BP prep time has like 15 minutes prep only, like you're probably going to be doing most of them simultaneously and together. So let's get into it. Assimilation against seclusion. So let's just first talk about the meta of stuff. What is debate? So it's supposed to be a structured discussion between two or more opposing perspectives on a given topic of motions. The presidential debates in the US, they call it a debate. It doesn't feel really like a debate to me or to most people. It's just like people shouting at each other. And that really isn't very interactive, or that isn't very constructive. There's not a lot of engagement. Debates are an intellectual discussion between different perspectives that are engaging in each other to ultimately attempt to reach a consensus or a sort of conclusion. But even if you can't reach a conclusion, the sort of willingness to agree to disagree, at least you have the better ability to understand the perspectives of your opponents and be more empathetic, especially towards certain things that you may not have lived experiences or that you may not fully understand. Yep, so that's what a debate is. Hopefully that's the kind of debates that you will get. Well, it is a process of learning and growth. So, like I mentioned earlier, case construction refers specifically to the process of creating a winning case, laying out the direction to go, identifying burdens to be discharged to gain a winning advantage. So especially for a lot of newer debaters, when you get a motion, when you get a topic, you have a lot of ideas about the topic that you just want to start throwing out. You just want to throw all those things out and start brainstorming with your partners. Alternatively, you see a topic, you don't know anything about the motion, like maybe something about, the Middle East or Saudi Arabia, or like some very niche US politics motions that you just don't know anything about. And then you don't know what to argue, you don't have any ideas, and you just start panicking. What I suggest is that instead of doing those things, which often don't lead to very constructive outcomes in terms of your chances of winning the debate, I think that it's more important to firstly look at the motion and identify what is the central question in that motion to determine the direction of the debate that you want to have. So having a sense of direction to your prep massively helps in firstly identifying material that is and is not relevant to the debate. Secondly, it gives you a sense of purpose, like you know what you need to work towards, rather than the approach of stumbling around in the dark that I went through for a long time when I first started debating. But just finally, it's your prep time is a lot more focused, it's a lot less stressful, and it's a lot more effective overall, because once you start prepping ideas and discussing ideas that move towards a certain outcome, and that outcome being the win condition for you in the round, it's just more likely that you eventually reach that win condition, and you'll be able to prove what's necessary for you to win a round. Yep. So case construction is a more macro aspect, the direction of a case, as opposed to the more nitty-gritty mechanistic analysis within arguments. So when you get a motion, don't jump straight into outcomes. I think we should argue this. I think we should do that. Don't start throwing out random ideas. I guess you can do it if you want to, but just sort of limit yourself, and also sort of be aware that this strategy or this approach is not the most effective. So if some people I know find it helpful to have a brainstorming session for 2 or 3 minutes, but the point is that it shouldn't be the entire 15 minutes of you just going around in circles, throwing out random different ideas, or trying to preempt or predict everything that your opponents are going to say. It's just not effective in terms of prepping. What I suggest you do instead is to firstly identify the context and the problem in a debate. Every single debate revolves around a problem, because when you get a motion, there usually is no correct answer to it. It's a discussion, it's subjective. If there is a correct answer, then the motion isn't debatable, isn't balanced. Like, that's not what we're here to debate. We're here to talk about things that exist in the gray area where there is discussion to be had. So after you identify the context of the problem, identify then the comparative in the round. So what are you defending in your world as opposed to the world of your opponents? Then identify your burden of proof. And after that, generate arguments that forwards your burdens. So if you, there are some motions that sort of require government teams to set up a policy or a mechanism as to how you're going to execute that particular policy. So easy example, in a motion of banning guns, government teams would probably need to defend some kind of model or mechanism for sort of collecting guns that exist right now. So something along the lines of setting up collection centers where the state sort of pays people for the guns and the weapons that they have. This probably will be the most effective ways to take the weapons that exist on the streets, off the streets, and provide the incentives for people to do it. Because alternatively, if you just ban it and you don't do anything about guns that do exist now, then it's just not very effective in going anywhere. Someone asked, what's a burden of proof? Sorry, that's a typo. It's a burden of proof. But what your burden of proof is in a round is what you need to prove to win the debate. And the first part of your prep, and especially the first part of constructing cases, needs to be identifying specifically what is your burden of proof and what you need to do to win the round. So there's this workshop by Hadar Goldberg, I think, that talks a lot about burden of proof and the philosophy behind it. I think it's quite interesting, quite helpful as well. So above this discussion that I don't think I'll be going into very in-depth into that topic, you probably can go watch that. I'll send a link to it later. Yep. So as we sort of walk through the process of case construction, I think that the concept of what your burden of proof is will become a lot more clear, I hope. So the motion for today, this house believes that leaders of minority religions in Europe should advocate for cultural assimilation over seclusion from the majority. It's a motion that I set last weekend at a tournament I was at. It features a relatively straightforward clash. There are different variations of the clash of assimilation against either integration or doing nothing, or in this case, is active seclusion. So the debate then just becomes, I don't want to give anything away. Okay, so you want to screen cap the motion or get the motion down, you can do that before I move on. Right, cool. The first part of prepping a case or constructing a case when you get a motion is to decompose the words in the motion. So we call it motion decomposition. It's breaking down the concepts in emotion to make it more digestible and more understandable, and also helps you to identify what the problem is and how you want to move things forward. So the most important part of case construction is to identify what the debate is about, and then to identify your burden of proof, because everything that you argue in a case, in a speech, you only have 7 minutes to speak. And every minute that you spend talking should be forwarding and pushing your burden of proof forward. If you have things that are not relevant to the debate, just don't talk about it. Like, it's not going to help you win the debate. The things that are going to help you win the debates are things that more or less directly engage or directly focus on proving your burden. And that's why identifying what that burden is to begin with is so important in the round. So how do you do that? To get there, you often need to break down the words and emotion, ask about the context to like sort of discover or identify the context and the characterization of the debate. So in this motion, and I've chosen this motion because there are quite a few moving parts in this motion that sort of needs to be explored and needs to be characterized. The first is the word leader. Second is minority religion. The third is Europe. I guess there's some things to be discussed about advocating, what it looks like, but probably not that important for burden analysis. Next part then is cultural assimilation, and the last part is seclusion. So in order to identify what this debate is about and what the central question in this round is, you sort of need to break down the words in the motion to be able to get to that level where you're able to identify what the primary question in the round is. So at this point, is there anything that anyone doesn't understand? Anyone have any questions before we move into the contextualization and stuff? Seeing none? Great. So breaking down the words of the motion is something that everyone should do in every single debate. It doesn't matter whether you've done the motion before, whether you've done a variation of the motion before. I've been debating for like, what, 8, 9 years, I think now. And when I get a motion, I still do this just because it helps me have a more clear idea about what's happening in the debate, the context and the problem, but also helps me characterize the actors, the stakeholders, and the things that have happened in this debate. It just makes things a lot clearer. So you may find this tedious, you may want to move straight into arguments and outcomes. More often than not, fleshing out and making the characterization clear is the more effective way of going about prep. So what are leaders? Leaders are people in charge. First, they are people that have a responsibility towards the people in those religion. You can say you can like identify that leaders have certain interests, have certain incentives that they want to lead, they may want to work towards rather. Leaders of a religion often, or a organization or any movement, probably would prioritize the interests of that organization or that movement. It's probably their primary incentives, but also the people that eventually do become the leaders and public faces do have personal incentives as to why they want to go there, like just want to be popular, they want to have fame, want to be rich and stuff. These are all valid points of characterization about leaders. And the way to get to that characterization is to sort of ask questions about the words. So probably the most pertinent question here is, who are leaders, or what are leaders? And answering that or those questions will give you the context and the characterization needed for the round. So similarly for minority religion, just ask the question, what is minority religion? Like, what is religion to begin with? It's like a set of moral beliefs or concepts that people opt into. It brings them meaning and solace in their lives. If you're a Christian, you go to church every Sunday, you pray, you believe in God, because you believe that God can bring some meaning to your life. And a lot of people do turn to religion to find meaning and solace. Probably, and it's quite a divisive issue as well. So that's why there's so many debates about religion. Minority religion is probably just the fact that you are part of a religion that's relatively small in number. We'll later look at the context of Europe, but at this point, minority religions often contrasted to the majority religion. So if a lot of people in a society believe in a certain religion, so in Malaysia, we're a Islamic country, so most people in this nation believe they are Muslims, so they believe in Islam to varying extents, of course. But the point here is that if you are not a Muslim, you're probably part of the minority religion in Malaysia. So every nation has different contexts, have their own context. There can be many different types of minority religions as well. But this debate sort of focuses on the minority religion in Europe, which sort of leads to the next part about Europe. So where is Europe? Obviously, it's a place on the map, but more relevant to this debate is the cultural context of Europe. And I think that the most obvious thing that comes to mind here is the problem of refugees, of xenophobia. So basically, the EU refugee crisis that happened a few years back, where the Arab Spring and a whole bunch of civil war to the Middle East often led to a lot of people fleeing their nations and seeking asylum in Europe. Places like France and Germany that took in a lot of refugees. And these refugees were often predominantly Muslim or predominantly Islamic. I think at this point that we have like first generation immigrants already, or just like people that have migrated towards Europe from other nations before. Like these are all the people that we're talking about in Europe. But specifically why it's a problem in Europe is because the refugee crisis has brought on a lot of xenophobic like sentiments across different places. So you have politicians like Boris Johnson that are calling Muslim women wearing the burqa like letterboxes. It's probably not a very accepting term towards them. It's quite derogatory, like they're making fun of their religion. You have there's a lot of people that in those nations that feel that the immigrants are taking advantage of the system, like they are the leeches of society, so to speak, and therefore they're not very accepting on them. The other reason is that the refugees coming into your nation do pose a cost on your nation, like in the form of welfare, that you need to treat them. Like a lot of them are sick, a lot of them are poor. They don't really bring a lot of value to your country, at least in the short term. So that's why the local citizens feel that their needs are deprioritized. But just also these refugees are willing to work for relatively low wages, which means that the lower skilled workers, or the lower skilled locals in Europe have less jobs available to them, just quite simply because minimum wage laws apply towards them, and like they just want to feel that they're better than refugees, which better than immigrants, which is why they don't really like them. So again, all of these things are true to certain extents or certain levels, but asking the question about these things and helping you identify the context and the problem in Europe specifically is quite important, because then the rest of the debate or the comparison in debate becomes a lot clearer. Yep. One thing worth mentioning about Brexit and the UK leaving the EU, it's partly also to deal with the immigration crisis, just because the UK was one of the nations that did take in quite a few refugees and also bore quite a large cost of running the EU. I mean, the refugee crisis was part of many problems that the UK was facing, but the point is that they felt that they were bearing a disproportionate burden, and that's why they wanted to leave the EU. So that could factor into the debate later, like depending on how you structure your arguments. But yeah, it's just good to bring all these things out. The next thing then in motion decomposition is to ask the question, what is cultural assimilation? So cultural assimilation here, and just like a hint, if there's any words in the motion that you don't understand, you can always ask the adjudication core, because when we set motions, we don't, like we set it so that people can have good debates. We don't want you to not have a good debate because you don't understand any words in the motion. So if you don't understand any of it, the AIDC core can give you the definition of the word. We obviously won't give you any context, like all this stuff here. We won't be giving it to you, but we'll try to help you understand what the debate's about, so that you can have a meaningful debate and a pretty okay experience at a tournament. So what is cultural assimilation? It's giving up certain aspects of your culture to fit in with the majority. That's the definition of assimilation. So what it looks like in reality is probably things like whitewashing. So you have a lot of immigrants, you have a lot of Asians that have gone over to the US and UK. And when they come back to visit you, and then they start talking in this white accent, like become Sama Saleh over there. Like these are examples of assimilation. And the reason why they do it is because they just want to fit in with the majority. They don't want to be different. Like the concept of otherization and discrimination can be quite strong. And that's why there's a lot of pressure on people to assimilate. But specifically for the people in Europe, it looks like probably giving up public expression of religion, language, cultural clothes, markings, etc. So if you have a traditional language, you would give it up. So you would talk less. You would speak to your children in English if you are parents. You would send your children to English-speaking schools. Try your best to learn it and deprioritize your own language. It probably looks like Muslim women in Europe giving up on wearing the burqa. Even though it's part of their religion, assimilating means giving up certain aspects of your religion in order to fit in with the majority. And that's one of those things that is involved, like maybe no public prayers. At best, if you still want to keep certain aspects of your religion, you only practice it privately in your own house or your own rooms. These are all examples of what assimilation looks like in reality. The last thing then to discuss about the motion and the context is what is seclusion. It's hiding away, it's not interacting with the majority. What it looks like in reality is probably forming of your own enclaves. So this looks like neighborhoods that are majority Muslim or majority a certain religion. So even though you may be a minority when it comes to the entire nation, if you all bunch together in a few neighborhoods or a few towns, then those towns become a majority, like belonging to you. And that's where you can have, it's what we call an enclave. It's basically a group of people or a community that's more or less secluded or isolated from the rest of the nation or the rest of society. And they do that just because they want to have their own lives, their own community, their own support structures and social relationships that exist outside of the majority religion, just because, yeah, they don't want to be discriminated against. Yep. So what happens in those enclaves? You live your life, you speak your own language, you practice your own religion, you don't face the worst forms of discrimination to microaggressions, which means your life could potentially be better off. That's what this debate is, one of the questions. So having understood all those things, I know I've taken some time to do the decomposition. In tournaments, take as much time as you need to break down the words of the motion and understand what the debate is about and where the debate is going. It's always better to understand the direction of where you're going before you actually start going somewhere, because if you don't know where you're going to end up, if you don't know the direction that you go and you just start going for the sake of moving, yep, the place that you eventually end up might not be very good for you. Right, so after you break down the words of the motion and decompose the stuff, the next part of case construction then is comparative identification, or sort of identifying what's the clash or the comparison in both worlds. So one easy way to think about it is that in policy motions, the world that government is defending is a world with the policy, and the world that opposition is defending is a world without the policy. So how do things change on the both sides? How do those impacts materialize, and what is eventually better? These are all part of the comparative analysis that eventually needs to be made in the round. So as I think the wording of this motion is quite clear and quite straightforward, it was intended to be so, that government just needs to defend minority religious religious leaders advocating for assimilation over seclusion, and opposition burden in this round is to defend the converse, that is seclusion over assimilation. Just one thing to note about motions like this is that sometimes when you see the motion that you have to defend like X over Y, there's this temptation for opposition teams to sometimes say, oh, we don't want to defend Y over X. We want to defend like maybe a combination of X and Y. And just from a strategical point of view, that just isn't helpful towards you as an op team, just because the clash is straightforward, and the easiest way for you to win the debate is to engage that clash directly and move it all the way to the other side. Because if at any point opposition teams in this round concede that maybe assimilation does bring some benefits, maybe we should assimilate it a little bit, then you are undermining every other part of your case, where you try to make the argument that assimilation is actually quite harmful and it's not something that we should be doing as a leader. Yep. So I always advocate for teams to take hardline stances. That is, just be willing to make the trade-offs. Like, don't be afraid to make trade-offs. Debates are all about trade-offs because, yeah, that's what a debate is basically. So once you identify the comparative, the question in the debate then becomes a lot clearer. What should minority religious leaders do? Should they do this as, should they advocate for assimilation as Gulf is proposing, or should they advocate for seclusion as Op is proposing? Again, note that as a leader, you probably cannot do both, because these are two things that are mutually exclusive. They cannot exist in the same world. So you cannot interact and not interact with people at the same time. That just makes absolutely no sense. So that's why that's where the clash in the debate, or the split in the debate, or the more recent trend of saying the delta in the debate stems from. Someone asked, what happens when two teams have different understandings of the motion? So I sincerely hope that does not happen, because if that does happen, the debate is not going to turn out very well, and the wording of the motion will be as clear as it possibly can to avoid that sort of scenario. But in a situation where teams have different understandings of the motion, you first need to ask whether the different understanding is legitimate and valid. So maybe it's just a different aspect of the case that you perhaps didn't think of in prep, and it could be a perfectly legitimate Gulf case or a perfectly legitimate Op case. In which case, you just need to think a bit faster and engage with those things in their best case, like assuming it is like legitimate and makes sense. Why, if you're rebutting them, why should we still prefer your side over theirs? And yeah, basically. And most of the times, given that given that we try to make motions as clear as possible, and given that most debaters are quite intelligent people, like even at the school level, you're all really bright kids, I think that this usually will not happen. But if it does happen, that the teams have completely different understandings of the motion, you have a completely different definition of the motion, what you would need to do is to break down the understanding of your opponents and try to understand where they're coming from. And if it's true that the stance in they're taking in this debate is just not legitimate, you need to explain why that is the case, and why the best way to adjudicate the debate is still by the metrics and the case that you are setting up in your side. So I think like a example for this is that if government sets up the debate to say that a leader should advocate for assimilation over seclusion, and opposition side comes up and argues that, proposes that, leaders get all their followers to like leave the country or something like that, then as the government team, that just directly needs to be challenged, and you just need to start asking whether that's legitimate, whether that's possible, whether that's good, and just do the comparisons from there. As far as possible, always try to take your opponents at their best. Always try to engage with their arguments at their best, rather than, like obviously you will have to rebut them and say that they're wrong, but you always want to give them as much credit as possible and still rebut the best versions of their arguments, because that's the most effective way to win. But that's also the better discussion to be had, where you directly compare the best versions of two arguments. So again, I hope that different understanding of the motion does not happen, but if it does happen, ask questions, identify, and like you just have to engage with it and deal with it. Does anyone else have any questions about comparative identification so far? So once you identify the central question in debate, the burden that you need to prove is just basically your side of the motion. So the burden that government teams in this round need to prove is just, I think it's on the next slide.
Yeah,
So once you, yes, someone say something?
yeah.
Yep.
So the question is, you're gonna give the motion 15 minutes earlier, right? Or is it
All right.
like are you gonna give the motion 15 minutes earlier so that we can do some research about it?
So at the tournament, the motions are going to be released 15 minutes before the debate starts. I don't think we're having a debate tonight. It's just a workshop for constructing cases. Yes, and the only time that you will have to prep the motion is in those 15 minutes of prep time. So you won't be getting the motions beforehand. You won't even be getting the themes beforehand, and the only people that you can talk to during prep time is your teammate and the education core. You should not be talking to other people. You should not be using Google or the internet. So yep, let's try to be fair as possible. Okay, so coming back then to the central question of what leaders should do in this round. Once you identify the central question, generating arguments become a lot easier. So the things that you bring up in round are just far less likely to become irrelevant in the debate. So like, let's say in this motion, someone starts talking about, oh, people in the majority. And I think that the most obvious question is here is that how do white people in Europe factor into the minority religions leaders' decision-making calculus? Like, how does it affect that decision-making? And most of the time, it probably wouldn't. Like, I guess there's some auxiliary arguments to be made about this. But the point here is that you can ensure that the stuff that you're saying are relevant and that you also explain the linkages of your material towards your burden and why the things that you are talking about should be reasons for the adjudication to give you the win. Just also, you're likely to be more focused in prep time. It's less stress for everyone, especially if you're opening government. You have 15 minutes to prep before the prime minister gets up to start speaking. You should use those 15 minutes as efficiently and as effectively as possible. And generally, spending time panicking is time that is not spent prepping. So try your best, even if you don't know anything about motion. Just sit down, break down the words in the motion, identify the clash and the burdens that you need to prove, and then do your best to generate arguments that move towards that burden. You'll be quite surprised as to how far you can come, even on motions that you know absolutely nothing about. Okay, so I think that's more or less on burden identification. So in this debate, the burden on Gulf teams is just to explain why leaders should prioritize assimilation over seclusion, even if it comes at certain trade-offs. So everything past this point is argument construction. So an argument is just basically a structured way of explaining an idea that you have. The idea that you need to explain in this debate is, why we should prioritize assimilation over seclusion. And all those comes in the different sections of the argument. You talk about the problem, you talk about the layers of the analysis that links the problem towards the solution that you're describing, like a certain outcome. Maybe an outcome in this round that you can say is that you get better protection for the members of your minority religion. And the argument is where you step the judge through the process as to how that outcome materializes, why it comes into existence, and like in the impacting of the argument, why that argument is important. We have a question about what are clashes. Clashes or clash points are points where teams disagree on. So when, like in every debate, given that obviously there's one team supporting the motion and one team like opposing the motion, there will be certain things that teams agree on and certain things that teams do not agree on. So for instance, in this round, if government comes up and says that minority religions are religions that have relatively smaller number of people, but also face some level of discrimination in societies, especially in Europe, opposition team is not going to come up and say we disagree that minority religion is small in number. We think that minority religion are quite large, and like that just doesn't make sense because the word minority, by definition, implies that you are comparatively less in number than the majority. So the context of what minority religions are is probably not going to be a clash point in this round, given that both teams sort of agree that the leaders of minority religion have a choice to make, and you probably will face discrimination on both sides. The question is how best you reduce that discrimination and how best you mitigate the harms towards the members of your community. So that's where the disagreement, that's where the clash happens in terms of what's the best way to protect the people in your community. Then after that, within the analysis, within the clash analysis, perhaps in government, you will explain that being more similar to the majority will make it easier for you to form like social relationships and connections with the majority. Like simply because like if you're a Muslim immigrant, if you learn how to speak English and like speak it well, then it's easier for you to talk with white people just because there's just no incentive for white people to learn any other language other than English, which just means that it's easier for you to form those relationships. So perhaps opposition can then come up and respond to that by saying that even if you learn the language, it doesn't mean that they'll want to talk to you. It doesn't mean that they want to speak with you just because you still look different. And then the clash then becomes how would members of the majority react? Would they react positively? Would they react negatively? And then teams sort of need to explain why you're winning the clash by providing reasons as to why your side of the clash is more likely to be true or more important in the round. So in the clash of how the majority will react, the team that explains the incentive structures of the majority and just giving more likelihood analysis, given also giving context and examples, is probably going to win the clash. And whichever side does win the clash is going to win their outcomes. And like if Gulf, you provide reasons as to why, people do have incentives to be nice. People do have incentives to reach out. Generally speaking, people are quite, fair and cooperative. I look at different NGOs that are there that exist to help immigrants sort of, fit into this new society. This proves that people that are nice do exist, and they are willing to reach out to you, especially if you are more culturally proximate towards them. So if you do that, then you're able to prove that on balance of probabilities, people are more likely to be accepting of you, which means that your life is more likely to be better off at the point where you have more ability to connect with them and like have more like social supports and relationships and friendships and stuff. So if opposition wants to win this point, then they'll need to respond to this and rebut it to explain why, this is not true. The number of people that are willing to reach out are quite small in number. You also need to weigh this against the groups of people that are quite, vitriolic, like quite xenophobic, quite racist. Things like hate crimes are happening, things like lynching of people on the streets, which just means that on balance, given that you don't know whether people are going to be nice to you or not, you probably should err on the side of caution, just because as a minority, you're just disproportionately more vulnerable to things like lynching. You have less political protection, you have less ability to defend yourself in public. That's just why you should prioritize your protection over whatever benefits you could gain from this. What time? Yep. Okay, so this is more or less the end of the workshop of case construction. Here's where I thought it would be interesting, or I guess helpful for you all to sort of have a discussion about what teams can argue on both government and opposition. Understandably, I think that if some people need to leave, don't be afraid to do so. This lecture will be recorded and will be uploaded sometime later. Yep. So once you identify the clash, it's just about explaining why your side of the clash is winning, or why your version of events, your case, is preferable to the rest. So I guess we can open this discussion to the floor. Does anyone have any ideas as to why assimilation should be preferred over seclusion? or before we go into this, does anyone have any other questions about case construction in general, like the identification of burdens and stuff? Nothing? Okay. So if there's no questions, before we move on into the discussions, I think I just end the recording here.